Sarah Mitchell had faced challenges before, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited at Naval Air Station Pensacola. What started as routine workplace harassment would become a lesson in assumptions, power, and the dangerous game of underestimating someone based on appearances. The sailors thought they knew exactly who they were dealing with when the quiet woman in civilian clothes walked through their doors. They were wrong. Dead wrong. And by the time they realized their mistake, it would be too late to take back the words, the pranks, and the deliberate attempts to make her quit. This is the true story of how a group of military personnel learned that sometimes the person you're trying to push around might just be the one who ends up giving you orders. Sometimes the new girl isn't new at all, she's your new boss. What happens when you target someone you think is powerless, only to discover they hold all the power? What happens when your assumptions about authority, gender, and hierarchy come crashing down in the most humiliating way possible? This is that story. A story about respect, assumptions, and the moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned completely upside down. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Naval Air Station Pensacola as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her rental car. She had arrived 3 days early, wanting to observe the base operations before officially taking command. At 42, Sarah had spent the last 20 years climbing the ranks of the Navy, earning her position through dedication, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. But today, she looked like any other civilian contractor or visiting family member. She wore simple khaki pants, a navy blue blazer, and carried a leather briefcase. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she had chosen to wear minimal makeup. Nothing about her appearance screamed military authority. This was intentional. Sarah had learnt early in her career that sometimes the best way to assess a command was to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching.
The base was bustling with morning activities.
Sailors in their crisp uniforms moved with purpose across the grounds. Pilots prepared for training flights, and maintenance crews worked on aircraft. Sarah walked slowly, taking mental notes of everything she observed. The base appeared to be running efficiently, but she wanted to see more before making her presence known. As she approached the main administrative building, she noticed a group of 5 sailors gathered near the entrance. They were supposed to be on duty, but instead they were engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation. One of them, a petty officer named Rodriguez, was telling an animated story, while the others laughed loudly. Their behavior wasn't necessarily problematic, but Sarah made note of the relaxed atmosphere. When she entered the building, the receptionist barely looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" the young woman asked without making eye contact. "I'm here to speak with Commander Davis," Sarah replied politely. "Do you have an appointment?" The receptionist finally looked up, quickly scanning Sarah from head to toe with a dismissive expression. "No, but I believe he's expecting me eventually."
The receptionist sighed dramatically.
"Commander Davis is very busy. You'll need to schedule an appointment through proper channels. There's a form you need to fill out, and we'll need to verify your clearance level." Sarah nodded calmly. "I understand. Could you direct me to the cafeteria instead? I'd like to get some coffee while I wait. Down the hall, take a left, then another left. You can't miss it." The receptionist had already returned her attention to her computer screen. The cafeteria was moderately busy with personnel grabbing coffee and light breakfast items. Sarah got in line behind 2 sailors who were complaining loudly about their duties. "I swear, if one more civilian comes in here acting like they own the place, I'm going to lose it," said Seaman First Class Thompson, a tall man with an aggressive posture. "Yesterday, some lady in a business suit tried to tell me I was standing in the wrong place. Can you believe that?" His companion, Petty Officer Williams, nodded in agreement. "These contractors think they can just walk in here and start giving orders. They don't understand military protocol or respect for rank. Active recruitment." The cashier listened quietly as she ordered her coffee. The cashier, another young sailor, was friendly enough but seemed distracted and unprofessional in his interaction with customers. Finding a table in the corner, Sarah sat down with her coffee and a notepad. She began writing her observations, keeping her notes discreet. The behavior she was witnessing wasn't egregiously bad, but it showed a lack of discipline and attention to detail that concerned her. About 20 minutes later, the same group of sailors from outside entered the cafeteria. They were louder now, clearly more comfortable in their environment. Rodriguez was still the center of attention, regaling his audience with stories of his weekend adventures. "So there I was trying to explain to this girl that I'm Navy, right? And she just laughs and says the Navy isn't a real military branch," Rodriguez said, causing his friends to erupt in mock outrage. "What did you tell her?" asked Petty Officer Jackson, leaning forward with interest. I told her that we're the ones who get the Marines where they need to go, and without us, they'd be stuck on land crying about it, Rodriguez replied, puffing out his chest dramatically. The group's conversation continued in this vein, full of bravado and increasingly inappropriate comments about civilians, women in the military, and their disdain for anyone who wasn't part of their inner circle. Sarah continued to observe, taking careful mental notes of names and behaviors. When a young female sailor approached their table to clean up, Thompson made a show of moving his feet slowly and deliberately, forcing her to work around him. "Careful there, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you to strain yourself," he said with a smirk. The woman, who couldn't have been more than 19, blushed furiously but said nothing. She quickly finished cleaning and hurried away. The group laughed at her obvious discomfort. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composed exterior. This type of behavior was exactly what she had been brought in to address. The previous base commander had been relieved of duty partly due to reports of declining morale and inappropriate conduct among personnel. As she was preparing to leave, Sarah noticed the same young female sailor from earlier approaching her table. The woman looked nervous but determined. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said quietly. "I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here for a while. Are you waiting for someone?" Sarah smiled kindly. "Not exactly. I'm just observing and learning about the base. What's your name, sailor?" "Seaman Recruit Peterson, ma'am. I started here 3 weeks ago." The young woman glanced nervously toward the table where the 5 sailors were still holding court. "How are you finding your assignment here, Peterson?" The recruit hesitated, clearly struggling with whether to speak honestly. "It's challenging, ma'am. But I'm learning a lot." Sarah could read between the lines. The young woman was clearly dealing with the kind of harassment she had just witnessed, but she was too new and too low in rank to feel safe reporting it. "I'm sure you are," Sarah said gently. "If you ever need to speak with someone about your experiences here, don't hesitate to reach out to your chain of command." Peterson nodded but didn't look convinced. She excused herself and returned to her duties, leaving Sarah with a clearer picture of the challenges she would be facing. As Sarah gathered her things to leave, she overheard Rodriguez talking about a new arrival expected at the base. "I heard we're getting some new Admiral next week," he was saying. "Probably another desk jockey who's never seen real action. I give it 6 months before they transfer him somewhere else." "Or her," added Williams with a laugh. "These days they're putting women in charge of everything. Next thing you know, they'll have a female admiral running this place." "God help us if that happens," Thompson chimed in. "Can you imagine taking orders from some uptight woman who thinks she knows better than everyone else?" The group erupted in laughter again, completely oblivious to the fact that their future commanding officer was sitting less than 20 feet away, listening to every word. Sarah finished her coffee and stood up slowly. As she walked past their table, Rodriguez made eye contact with her and gave her what he probably thought was a charming smile. "Have a nice day, ma'am," he said with exaggerated politeness that was clearly meant to amuse his friends. "Thank you," Sarah replied pleasantly. "I'm sure I will." As she left the cafeteria, Sarah could hear them resuming their conversation, their voices fading behind her. She had learned everything she needed to know for now. The base had talented personnel and important missions, but there were serious cultural issues that needed immediate attention. Walking back through the corridors toward the exit, Sarah passed several other interactions that reinforced her observations. A female officer was interrupted 3 times by male subordinates during a briefing. A civilian contractor was treated dismissively by sailors who assumed he didn't belong there. The general atmosphere was one of casual disrespect for anyone perceived as an outsider. Outside the building, Sarah stood for a moment in the afternoon sun, organizing her thoughts. In 3 days, she would return to this same building as Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, the new commanding officer of Naval Air Station Pensacola. These same sailors who had ignored her, dismissed her, and talked disparagingly about female leadership would be standing at attention saluting her authority. She wondered how many of them would remember the quiet woman in civilian clothes who had spent the morning observing their behavior. She wondered how they would react when they realized that their casual disrespect and inappropriate comments had been witnessed by the very person they would soon be answering to. But more importantly, she wondered how quickly she could implement the changes needed to transform the culture of this base. The mission was too important, and the personnel deserved better leadership than what they had apparently been receiving. As she walked back to her rental car, Sarah's mind was already working on strategies for addressing the issues she had observed. Some problems would require immediate disciplinary action, others would need long-term cultural change initiatives. All of them would require strong, consistent leadership and a clear message that the days of casual unprofessionalism were over. The group of sailors who had been gathered outside the building when she arrived were gone now. presumably back to their actual duties. Sarah made a mental note to check the duty roster and see exactly what assignments they had been avoiding while they socialized. Driving away from the base, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. These sailors thought they knew exactly what military leadership looked like, and they were about to learn that their assumptions were completely wrong. The woman they had dismissed as irrelevant was about to become the most important person in their professional lives. Tomorrow, she would return to conduct more detailed observations. She wanted to see how the base operated during different shifts and under various conditions. She wanted to identify the personnel who were performing well despite the cultural challenges and those who were contributing to the problems. But tonight, she would review personnel files and begin planning her approach to taking command. Some changes would need to happen immediately upon her arrival. Others could be implemented gradually as she built trust and established her authority. One thing was certain, Naval Air Station Pensacola was about to experience a significant change in leadership style and expectations. The question wasn't where the change was coming, it was how the personnel would adapt when they realized that their new commander had been watching and listening from the very beginning. Sarah returned to Naval Air Station Pensacola the following morning, this time carrying a different briefcase and wearing a slightly more formal outfit. She had decided to push the boundaries a bit further, to see how the personnel would react to someone who appeared to be taking a more active interest in base operations. Her first stop was the maintenance hangar, where she had noticed some inefficiencies in aircraft preparation the previous day. The hangar was a massive space filled with sophisticated equipment and several aircraft in various stages of maintenance. The sound of tools, machinery, and shouted instructions created a symphony of military efficiency that Sarah found oddly comforting. She approached a group of maintenance technicians working on a training aircraft. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Gonzalez, was clearly skilled and professional. He was directing his team with precision while ensuring safety protocols were followed. Sarah observed from a respectful distance, genuinely impressed with the quality of work being performed. However, her peaceful observation was interrupted when Rodriguez and two of his friends from yesterday entered the hangar. They weren't assigned to maintenance duties, but they seemed to feel comfortable wandering through the space as if they owned it. "Hey, Chief," Rodriguez called out to Gonzalez. "Mind if we hang out here for a bit? Our supervisor is in a meeting and told us to find something useful to do." Gonzalez looked up from his work, clearly annoyed. "This isn't a social club, Rodriguez. If you don't have specific business here, you need to find somewhere else to wait." "Come on, Chief. Don't be like that." Rodriguez persisted. "We're all Navy here. We should be able to support each other." During this exchange, one of Rodriguez's companions, Petty Officer Williams, noticed Sarah standing nearby with her notepad. "Who's the reporter?" Williams asked loudly, pointing directly at Sarah. "Chief, did you know we have some civilian taking notes on our operations?" All work in the immediate area stopped as multiple personnel turned to look at Sarah. She maintained her calm demeanor, but the situation was clearly escalating in a direction she hadn't anticipated. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to identify yourself and explain what you're doing here," Gonzalez said, approaching Sarah with a professional but firm tone. Before Sarah could respond, Rodriguez stepped forward with a cocky grin. "Let me handle this, Chief." "Ma'am," he said, addressing Sarah with exaggerated formality. "This is a restricted area. Civilians aren't allowed to just wander around taking pictures and notes. Are you some kind of inspector or something?" "I'm not taking pictures," Sarah replied calmly. "And I have appropriate clearance to be on this base." "Clearance for what exactly?" Williams demanded, moving closer to Sarah in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating manner. "Who do you work for? What company sent you here?" Thompson, the third member of the group, had joined them now. "I bet she's one of those efficiency experts," he said with disgust. "They send these people in to find ways to cut personnel and reduce budgets. That's exactly what we need. Some civilian telling us how to do our jobs." The situation was drawing attention from throughout the hangar. Other personnel had stopped their work to watch the confrontation unfold. Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. She could defuse the situation by identifying herself, or she could allow it to continue and gather even more information about how these sailors handled conflict and authority. She chose to let it play out a bit further. "I'm here to observe and learn about base operations," Sarah said simply. "I'm not here to interfere with anyone's work."
Observe for who? Rodriguez pressed, his voice getting louder.
"You can't just show up and start spying on military operations without proper authorization." "Chief, shouldn't we call security?" Gonzalez was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. As a senior enlisted man, he understood the importance of following proper protocols, but he also didn't want to escalate unnecessarily. "Ma'am, if you could just show us your identification and explain your purpose here, we can resolve this quickly." Sarah reached into a briefcase, and for a moment she considered pulling out her military ID and ending the confrontation immediately. Instead, she pulled out a business card that identified her only as S. Mitchell, military consultant. Rodriguez grabbed the card before Gonzalez could take it. "Military consultant," he read aloud with obvious skepticism. "What does that even mean?" "Lady, I've been in the Navy for 8 years, and I've never heard of someone with a job title like that." "Maybe because you're just a petty officer who doesn't know everything about military operations," came a voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see Seaman Recruit Peterson, the young woman Sarah had spoken with the previous day. She was clearly nervous, but she had decided to speak up. "Peterson, mind your own business," Thompson snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does concern me," Peterson replied, her voice gaining strength. "If this woman has proper clearance to be here, then you three are out of line. And if she doesn't, then Chief Gonzalez is the one who should be handling it, not you." Rodriguez's face flushed red with anger. "Who do you think you are, recruit? You've been here for 3 weeks and you think you can tell petty officers how to do their jobs."
"I'm not telling you how to do your job," Peterson shot back.
"I'm pointing out that harassing civilians isn't your job." The tension in the hangar had reached a breaking point. Other personnel were clearly divided between those who supported Peterson's brave stance and those who thought she was out of line for challenging senior enlisted personnel. William stepped closer to Peterson, using his height and bulk to loom over her. "You need to learn your place, recruit. In the Navy, we have something called chain of command and respect for rank. And we also have regulations about how to treat civilians and visitors," Peterson replied, refusing to back down despite the obvious intimidation. Sarah watched this exchange with growing admiration for the young sailor's courage and growing disgust for the bullying behavior of the 3 petty officers. This was exactly the kind of toxic dynamic she had been brought in to eliminate. Chief Gonzalez finally stepped in to restore order. "That's enough, all of you. Rodriguez, Williams, Thompson, you 3 need to return to your assigned duties immediately. Peterson, thank you for your input, but I'll handle this situation." Rodriguez wasn't ready to back down. "Chief, with all due respect, I think we need to call this in. This woman could be anyone. She could be a foreign agent for all we know." "A foreign agent," Sarah repeated calmly. "Taking notes in a maintenance hangar, that's quite an accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's a possibility," Williams insisted. "In today's security environment, we can't be too careful about who has access to our facilities." Thompson nodded in agreement. "Besides, even if she's legit, what kind of consultant needs to sneak around without identifying herself properly? If she's here on official business, why all the secrecy?" These were actually reasonable questions, Sarah realized. If she truly had been a civilian contractor, their caution would have been appropriate and even commendable. The problem was their approach and their assumption that aggressive confrontation was the best way to handle the situation.
"I understand your concerns about security," Sarah said diplomatically.
"However, I'm not sneaking around. I've been quite open about my presence here, and I've followed all proper procedures for base access." "What procedures?" Rodriguez demanded. "Who authorized your visit? What's your security clearance level? What specific areas of the base are you cleared to access?" Before Sarah could answer, another voice joined the conversation.
"What's all the commotion over here?"
Commander Davis, the base's current acting commanding officer, had arrived in the hangar. He was a competent officer who had been serving as interim commander since the previous CO's departure. Sarah had been scheduled to meet with him later in the week. "Commander," Rodriguez said, snapping to attention along with the other sailors. "We have a situation with an unauthorized civilian conducting surveillance in a restricted area." Davis looked at Sarah with curiosity rather than suspicion. "Ma'am, I'm Commander Davis. I understand there's some confusion about your presence here." "Good afternoon, Commander," Sarah replied professionally. "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding about my authorization to be on base." Rodriguez jumped in before Davis could respond. "Sir, this woman refuses to properly identify herself or explain her mission here. She claims to be a military consultant, but she won't say who she works for or what she's consulting about." Davis studied Sarah more carefully, and she could see recognition beginning to dawn in his eyes. He had obviously been briefed about her impending arrival, and he was starting to put the pieces together. "Ma'am," Davis said carefully, "perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office." I believe there may be some information that would clarify the situation. That would be helpful, Sarah agreed. As Sarah and Commander Davis prepared to leave the hangar, Rodriguez made one final comment that would prove to be spectacularly ill-timed. Commander, I hope you'll consider the security implications of allowing unauthorized personnel to wander around the base unsupervised. Some of us take our duty to protect military assets seriously, even if others don't. The implication that Commander Davis wasn't taking security seriously enough was clear to everyone present. Davis's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Sarah spoke up. Petty Officer Rodriguez, she said, her voice carrying a subtle but unmistakable note of authority that made everyone in the hangar pay attention. I want to thank you and your colleagues for your vigilance regarding base security. It's clear that you take your responsibilities seriously. Rodriguez looked confused by what seemed like a compliment, but something in Sarah's tone made him uneasy. However, Sarah continued, I would suggest that in the future, you might want to ensure you understand the full situation before making assumptions about people's authorization to be here. Ma'am, I don't understand what you mean, Rodriguez replied, but his confident swagger was beginning to waver. You will, Sarah said simply, very soon. As Sarah and Commander Davis left the hangar, Rodriguez turned to his friends with a puzzled expression. What do you think that meant? Williams asked. Probably nothing, Thompson replied, but he sounded less certain than usual. These consultant types always try to sound mysterious and important. Chief Gonzalez, however, had been in the Navy long enough to recognize the subtle signs of real authority when he saw them. He had noticed the way Commander Davis had treated the woman with respect, rather than suspicion, and he had caught the undertone in her voice when she addressed Rodriguez. Rodriguez, Gonzalez said quietly, you might want to be more careful about who you decide to confront. What do you mean, Chief? I mean that woman didn't act like any civilian consultant I've ever met. She acted like someone who's used to being in command. Rodriguez laughed nervously. Come on, Chief. You think some middle-aged woman in a blazer is going to turn out to be someone important? She's probably just trying to look tough after getting called out. But as Rodriguez said these words, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a significant mistake. There had been something about the woman's demeanor, something about the way Commander Davis had treated her, something about her final warning that suggested this situation was far from over. Peterson, who had witnessed the entire exchange, felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She was glad someone had finally stood up to Rodriguez and his friends, but she worried about potential retaliation. In her short time on base, she had already learned that these particular sailors had long memories and didn't forget perceived slights. As the hangar slowly returned to normal operations, the personnel who had witnessed the confrontation began discussing what had happened. Some sided with Rodriguez, feeling that the woman had been secretive and deserved to be questioned. Others thought the three petty officers had been unnecessarily aggressive and unprofessional. What none of them realized was that in less than 24 hours, they would all understand exactly who they had been dealing with. The woman they had confronted, dismissed, and challenged would be returning to the base in full dress uniform, with all the authority and respect that her rank commanded. The sailors who thought they had successfully intimidated a civilian consultant were about to learn that they had actually been challenging their new commanding officer, and that lesson would be delivered in a way that none of them would ever forget. Monday morning arrived with typical Florida sunshine, but the atmosphere at Naval Air Station Pensacola was anything but typical. Today was the day the new commanding officer would officially take command, and the entire base was preparing for the ceremony. Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson had spent the weekend trying to forget about their encounter with the mysterious civilian consultant. They had convinced themselves that the woman was probably long gone, having completed whatever inspection or evaluation she had been conducting. They were looking forward to meeting their new commander and hoped he would bring some stability to the base after months of interim leadership. I heard the new Admiral is supposed to be some kind of hotshot, Rodriguez said as he adjusted his dress uniform in the barracks mirror. Probably another fast-track officer who's never spent real time with enlisted personnel. Williams nodded as he polished his shoes. As long as he's not one of those micromanagers who wants to change everything just to put his own stamp on the place. Thompson was struggling with his necktie, clearly nervous about the formal ceremony. I just hope he appreciates the work we're doing here. Some of these new commanders come in thinking they need to fix problems that don't exist. None of them had any idea that their new commanding officer had already spent considerable time observing their work ethic and professional behavior. Meanwhile, in the base's VIP quarters, Sarah was making her final preparations. She had arrived the previous evening in full military transport, complete with an official entourage and all the ceremonial elements befitting a rear admiral taking command of a major installation. She stood before the mirror in her dress blue uniform, complete with all her ribbons, insignia, and the gold stripes that marked her rank. The transformation from the civilian-dressed observer of the past few days to the imposing figure of military authority was dramatic and intentional. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Harrison, knocked on the door. "Admiral, it's time for the final briefing before the ceremony." "Come in, Harrison," Sarah called out. Lieutenant Commander Harrison entered with a tablet containing the ceremony schedule and personnel roster. "Ma'am, the entire base complement will be in attendance. Commander Davis has done an excellent job organizing the event." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Commander Davis has been very professional throughout this transition. I'm impressed with his leadership during the interim period."
"Yes, ma'am."
He's prepared detailed briefings on all base operations, personnel issues, and ongoing challenges, Harrison said, handing her the tablet.
Is there anything specific you'd like to address during your first remarks as commanding officer? Sarah smiled slightly as she reviewed the personnel roster, noting several familiar names from her recent observations.
"Actually, yes. I think it's important to establish from the beginning that leadership is about more than rank and authority. It's about character, respect, and understanding that every person on this base contributes to our mission." "Understood, ma'am. The ceremony begins in 30 minutes. As Harrison left to make final preparations, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the past few days. Her unconventional approach to assessing the base had provided invaluable insights that no formal briefing could have delivered. She had seen firsthand the challenges facing personnel like Seaman Recruit Peterson, and she had identified specific individuals whose behavior needed immediate correction. The ceremony would be held in the base's main auditorium, with overflow seating in adjacent areas connected by live video feed. As the appointed time approached, personnel from throughout the base gathered in their dress uniforms, creating a sea of navy blue and crisp white. Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson found seats together in the middle section of the auditorium. They were surrounded by hundreds of their colleagues, all curious to see their new commanding officer for the first time. "I wonder what she's like," came a voice from behind them. Rodriguez turned around to see Seaman Recruit Peterson sitting 2 rows back. "What did you say?" "The new commanding officer," Peterson clarified. "I heard it's a woman, Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell." Williams laughed dismissively. "Where did you hear that?" "I'm pretty sure it's a man. Admiral, something with an M." "It's definitely Admiral Mitchell," Peterson insisted. "I saw the official announcement." Thompson shook his head. "Even if it is a woman, I'm sure she's qualified. But it'll be interesting to see how she handles a base like this." Rodriguez was less diplomatic. "I just hope she understands that this isn't some desk job at the Pentagon. Running an operational base requires real military experience, not just political connections." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the color guard and the beginning of the formal ceremony. The base chaplain offered an invocation, followed by remarks from the regional commander, who had come to officiate the change of command. Commander Davis was called forward to give his final report as interim commanding officer. He spoke professionally about the base's mission readiness, recent achievements, and ongoing challenges. As he concluded his remarks, he announced that it was time to welcome the new commanding officer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Davis said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system, "it is my honor to introduce the new commanding officer of Naval Air Station Pensacola, Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell." The side door opened and Sarah entered in full dress uniform, escorted by her aide and followed by the ceremonial elements appropriate to her rank. The entire auditorium rose to attention as she made her way to the podium. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he recognized the figure approaching the microphone. Williams grabbed Thompson's arm so hard it left marks. Throughout the auditorium, murmurs of recognition began spreading among personnel who had encountered the civilian consultant over the past few days. But nowhere was the shock more pronounced than among the 3 sailors who had confronted her in the maintenance hangar. Rodriguez's face went pale as he realized that the woman he had accused of being a possible foreign agent was now standing before them wearing the uniform of a Rear Admiral. Sarah reached the podium and waited for the audience to be seated. Her eyes swept across the assembled personnel, briefly making contact with several familiar faces. When her gaze reached Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson, she paused just long enough to let them know she remembered them before continuing her scan of the audience. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying the natural authority that comes with years of command experience. "It is an honor to be here today as your new commanding officer. Naval Air Station Pensacola has a proud tradition of training excellence and operational readiness, and I look forward to building on that foundation." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "Over the past few days, I have had the opportunity to observe base operations and interact with personnel at various levels. What I have seen convinces me that we have the talent and dedication necessary to meet any challenge. Rodriguez felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He was beginning to understand the full implications of his behavior over the past few days. However, Sarah continued, I have also observed some areas where we can improve our standards of professionalism and respect for all members of our military community. Her tone remained pleasant and professional, but there was an unmistakable steel beneath her words that made everyone in the auditorium pay close attention. Military service is built on core values, honor, courage, and commitment. These values apply not only to how we face external challenges, but to how we treat each other every single day. Every person on this base, regardless of rank, gender, or background, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Peterson felt a surge of hope as she listened to these words. For the first time since arriving at the base, she felt like someone in authority understood the challenges she and others were facing. Sarah's speech continued for another 10 minutes, covering her vision for the base, her expectations for personnel at all levels, and her commitment to maintaining the highest standards of professional excellence. Throughout her remarks, she demonstrated a deep understanding of military operations and a clear vision for leadership that impressed even those who had initially been skeptical about serving under a female commander. As the ceremony concluded with the traditional elements of military protocol, personnel began filing out of the auditorium. Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson remained in their seats, reluctant to face the reality of what had just occurred. We are so screwed, Williams whispered. Maybe she won't remember, Thompson said hopefully. There were a lot of people she interacted with. Rodriguez knew better. Oh, she remembers. Did you see the way she looked at us? She remembers everything. Their fears were confirmed within hours of the ceremony's conclusion. All three received orders to report to the commanding officer's office at 1400 hours that afternoon. The message was brief and official, but they all understood its significance. At precisely 1400 hours, Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson stood at attention outside Admiral Mitchell's office. They had spent the intervening hours alternating between panic and attempts to rationalize their behavior. Each had convinced himself that perhaps the situation wasn't as bad as it seemed. They were wrong. Enter, came the crisp command from inside the office. The three sailors marched in and stood at rigid attention before Admiral Mitchell's desk. She was seated, reviewing their personnel files with the same careful attention she had given to her notepad in the cafeteria just days earlier. Petty Officer Rodriguez, Petty Officer Williams, Petty Officer Thompson, she said, looking up from the files. Please be seated. They sat down, maintaining military bearing but clearly nervous about what was coming. Gentlemen, Sarah began, I want to discuss your behavior over the past few days, specifically your interactions with a civilian consultant who was conducting observations on base. Rodriguez cleared his throat. Ma'am, if we may explain. You may not, Sarah interrupted firmly. You will listen. I spent 3 days on this base observing operations, personnel interactions, and the general culture of military professionalism. What I observed from the three of you was troubling. She pulled out her notebook and began reading from her detailed observations. Thursday morning, 0830 hours. Failure to maintain proper military bearing while on duty. Engaging in inappropriate conversation about civilians and female military personnel. Making derogatory comments about chain of command and military leadership. The three sailors exchanged glances, realizing that their new commanding officer had been documenting everything. Thursday afternoon, 1100 hours.
Harassment of junior personnel, specifically Seaman Recruit Peterson.
Creating a hostile work environment through intimidation and inappropriate comments. Sarah looked up from her notes. Should I continue? No, ma'am, Rodriguez replied quietly. Friday morning, 0945 hours. Confrontational behavior toward an authorized visitor. Failure to follow proper protocol for addressing security concerns. Insubordinate comments about military leadership and chain of command. She closed the notebook and looked directly at each of them. Gentlemen, I want you to understand something very clearly. Your behavior over the past few days represents everything that is wrong with military culture when it goes unchecked. You demonstrated disrespect for authority, harassment of subordinates, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what military professionalism means. Thompson finally found his voice. Ma'am, we were concerned about base security. We thought we were following proper procedure. Proper procedure, Sarah repeated. Is proper procedure to assume that any civilian on base is a security threat? Is proper procedure to attempt to intimidate visitors through aggressive confrontation? Is proper procedure to make derogatory comments about female leadership while on duty? None of them had an answer for these questions. Furthermore, Sarah continued, your treatment of Seaman Recruit Peterson was completely unacceptable. That young woman showed more military bearing and professional courage in standing up to your bullying than the three of you demonstrated in 3 days of interaction. Rodriguez tried one more time to salvage the situation. Ma'am, if we had known who you were— Stop right there, Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through his words like a blade.
If you had known who I was, you would have behaved differently?
That tells me everything I need to know about your character and your understanding of military values. She stood up and walked around to the front of her desk, looking down at the 3 seated sailors. Military courtesy and respect are not conditional on someone's rank or position. They are fundamental aspects of who we are as military professionals. The fact that you would treat a civilian consultant with disrespect and then claim you would have behaved better if you had known I was an admiral reveals a complete misunderstanding of what we expect from Navy personnel. The room was silent for a long moment, as the 3 sailors absorbed the full impact of their situation. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah announced. Each of you will receive formal counseling entries in your personnel files documenting these incidents. You will attend mandatory training on military professionalism and workplace respect. You will personally apologize to Seaman Recruit Peterson for your inappropriate behavior. She paused to let these consequences sink in. Additionally, Rodriguez, your recommendation for advancement to first-class petty officer is being withdrawn. Williams, you are being removed from the Leadership Development Program. Thompson, your request for transfer to a preferred duty station is being denied. The career implications of these actions were devastating, and all 3 sailors understood that their futures in the Navy had just become significantly more difficult. However, Sarah continued, this is also an opportunity for growth and redemption. Military service is about learning from mistakes and becoming better leaders and better people. If you can demonstrate genuine change in your attitudes and behavior, these setbacks don't have to define your careers. She returned to her seat behind the desk. Do any of you have questions about my expectations going forward?
No, ma'am, they replied in unison.
Then you are dismissed. Report to the base administrative office for your training schedules and counseling appointments. As the 3 sailors stood to leave, Sarah added one final comment. Gentlemen, I hope you'll remember this lesson for the rest of your careers. Leadership is not about rank or position. It's about character, and character is revealed by how we treat people when we think no one important is watching. After they left, Sarah sat alone in her office, reflecting on the events of the past week. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was only the beginning of the cultural changes she needed to implement at Naval Air Station Pensacola. Her intercom buzzed, and Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice came through. Admiral, Seaman Recruit Peterson is here to see you. Send her in. Peterson entered and stood at attention. Seaman Recruit Peterson reporting as requested, ma'am.
At ease, Peterson.
Please, have a seat. The young sailor sat down, clearly nervous but curious about why she had been summoned. Peterson, I want to thank you for your courage in standing up to harassment over the past few days. That took real military bearing and personal integrity. Peterson's eyes widened. Ma'am, you were there.
I was.
And I saw how you were treated, and I saw how you responded. Your willingness to speak up, even when facing intimidation from senior personnel, is exactly the kind of leadership we need in the Navy. Sarah pulled out another folder. I'm recommending you for early advancement consideration and assignment to the Base Leadership Development Program. Your personnel file shows excellent performance, and your actions this week demonstrate the potential for significant leadership responsibility. Peterson was speechless for a moment. Thank you, ma'am. I just tried to do what was right. That's exactly what leadership is, Sarah replied. Doing what's right, especially when it's difficult or unpopular. As Peterson left the office, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction about the changes that were beginning at Naval Air Station Pensacola. The 3 sailors who had targeted what they thought was a powerless civilian had learned that assumptions about authority and respect can be dangerous. More importantly, a young sailor who had demonstrated real courage and integrity was being rewarded for her military bearing and professional values. This sent a clear message to the entire base about what kind of behavior would be recognized and promoted under the new command. Over the following weeks, word of the incident spread throughout the base, becoming a powerful lesson about the importance of treating everyone with respect and professionalism. Personnel began to understand that their new commanding officer was always watching, always evaluating, and always ready to hold people accountable for their actions. Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson eventually became examples of redemption rather than failure. The shock of their encounter with Admiral Mitchell forced them to examine their attitudes and behavior in ways they had never done before. While their careers suffered immediate setbacks, all three eventually became more professional, more respectful, and better leaders as a result of the experience. The story of the new girl, who turned out to be the base admiral, became legendary at Naval Air Station Pensacola, serving as a reminder that in the military, respect and professionalism are not optional, and that true leadership can come from anyone, regardless of appearance or assumptions. Sarah Mitchell's unconventional approach to taking command had revealed critical issues that needed addressing, while also identifying personnel with real leadership potential. The base culture began to change, becoming more inclusive, more professional, and more focused on the values that make military service meaningful. And Seaman Recruit Peterson, who had shown courage when it mattered most, went on to have a distinguished career, eventually becoming an officer and a leader who remembered the lesson that sometimes the most important person in the room might not look like what you expect.